7 years in prison. One reason to come back. And the woman guarding the door to her daughter's life was the last person she should have fallen for. I'm Lena. This one's gonna cost her before it saves her.
The bus smells like burnt coffee, and the particular exhaustion of people who have been traveling long enough to stop pretending they're comfortable. Kenna Rowan has been on it for 11 hours. She doesn't mind. The bus is one of the few places in the world where no one expects anything from her. Not an explanation, not an apology, not the specific shape of remorse that satisfies other people. She presses her forehead against the cold window and watches the flat Texas landscape thicken slowly into something she recognizes, and she breathes. Colby appears on the horizon like a bruise. That's the only word for it. Something that happened to the land a long time ago and never quite healed over. She knows it isn't true. She knows the town is ordinary, that it has a farmer's market on Saturdays and a high school football team and people who love each other in the unremarkable daily way that most love happens. But she left it in handcuffs 7 years ago, and the mind keeps the version it was given. Before we go any further, if you're already feeling this one, hit subscribe, because this channel is full of stories exactly like it. And once you finish this video, tell me in the comments, what's the moment in this story you think you'll be thinking about tomorrow? I read every single one. She has one bag. This is not a poverty detail. It's a choice. She spent the last 2 years of her sentence deciding what she would carry out and what she would leave behind, and the answer was almost everything. A change of clothes. Her mother's watch, which stopped working in 2019, and which she has not tried to fix. A photograph she won't look at on the bus, because she doesn't trust herself not to make a sound. The motel on Route 9 takes cash. The woman at the desk doesn't look up from her phone, and Kenna is so grateful for that indifference she nearly says thank you twice. She carries her bag up one flight of stairs, unlocks room 114, and sits on the edge of the bed in the particular way of someone who is not sure they have earned the right to make themselves at home anywhere. The room smells like pine cleaner and old carpet. She's slept in worse. She pulls a folded piece of paper from her jacket pocket. She doesn't need to unfold it. She has the address memorized down to the house number, has traced the route on Google Maps until she could draw it from memory. 44 Grover Lane, the Ward House. She's thought about that address the way other people think about destinations they're dreaming of, except the feeling underneath isn't longing, exactly. It's older than longing, more responsible. Her daughter is 6 years old. She has been 6 years old for 3 weeks, based on Kenna's count, which she has kept with the same precision she once gave to nothing at all. Diem. Patrick named her, in the one phone call they allowed Kenna after the sentencing. His voice careful and terrible in the way of someone delivering news they have not yet decided how to feel about themselves. "We're calling her Diem," he said. "My parents are going to raise her." He didn't say, "You don't get a say." He didn't have to. She doesn't cry. This is not toughness. It's something closer to discipline, the kind that comes from learning. Specifically and repeatedly, that crying changes nothing and costs something she doesn't have to spare. She folds the paper back into her pocket and lies down on top of the bedspread without taking off her shoes, and she stares at the ceiling, and she thinks about all the things she is going to have to do tomorrow. Get food, find work, not fall apart in a public place. The next morning is cold and gray, and smells like rain that hasn't committed yet. She walks to the diner on Elm because it's the closest thing open before 8, and because she needs to eat before she can be a person. And she sits at the counter and orders eggs and coffee and keeps her eyes on her plate. The woman at the table behind her is describing a dream she had to someone on speakerphone. A man 3 stools down is reading a physical newspaper, which Kenna finds unreasonably moving. Normal people doing normal things in a town she broke. She finds a help-wanted sign in the window of a bar called the Rusty Nail on the walk back. She almost keeps walking. Then she stops, looks at her reflection in the glass beside the sign. Thinner than she was, older in the way that isn't about years, and thinks, it doesn't have to be forever. It just has to be today. She goes in and asks for the manager, and gets the job by default, because the other applicant didn't show. Gerald gives her an apron and tells her not to break glasses. She says she won't. In the afternoon, she walks to Grover Lane. She doesn't let herself take the direct route. She circles, adds blocks, gives herself time to change her mind, which she does not do. She stops 2 houses down. The Ward House is a yellow colonial with white shutters and a garden that someone tends carefully, and in the driveway there is a tricycle with pink streamers on the handlebars, one of them coming undone. There is chalk on the driveway. Shapes mostly. A sun with too many rays. A dog that might be a horse. Kenna stands on the sidewalk with her hands in her pockets, and her heart pressing upward against the inside of her chest, like it's trying to get somewhere. She counts to 60. That's what she gave herself. 60 seconds, which is more than she deserves and less than she wants. At 58, she notices that her hands are shaking, which she minds less than she expected. At 60, she turns around and walks back the way she came. She is not here to take anything. She needs to remember that, every day, until it becomes the kind of truth she can carry without thinking. She is here because her daughter exists, and she exists, and the distance between those 2 facts has already cost everyone enough. She is here to prove, to whoever requires proof, to the Wards, to the town, to the version of herself she left in a courtroom, that she can be someone worth knowing. She doesn't know yet what that will cost. She suspects it will be everything she has left, and then some. And if you enjoyed this story, my Patreon has a lot more content like it. Full-length tales, extra chapters, and exclusive scenes. New stuff every week. Check it all out right below. The Help Wanted sign is still in the window on Wednesday morning, which Kenna takes as a sign. Not of fate. She stopped believing in fate somewhere around year 2, but of simple logistics. Someone still needs help. She still needs work. The math is uncomplicated in a way that most things in her life are not, and she walks through the door of the Rusty Nail at 9 a.m., with her hand steady and her chin level, and the practiced expression of someone who has nothing to hide, which is the face she wears when she has the most. Gerald is a tired man in the specific way of people who have been running something alone for too long. He interviews her at the bar with a mug of coffee he doesn't offer to share, asks 3 questions. Can you work weekends? Do you have experience? Are you going to be a problem? And seems satisfied enough with her answers that he doesn't ask any follow-up questions, which is either good management or exhaustion. She suspects exhaustion. She is grateful for it either way. He hands her an apron across the bar. It's black, slightly faded, with the bar's name printed on the front in letters that have mostly survived the wash. She ties it around her waist the way she does everything now, carefully, deliberately, like each small action is a proof of something. I can be trusted with an apron. I can be trusted with glasses. I can be trusted. The logic is circular, and she knows it, and she keeps going anyway. Her first shift starts at 4. She spends the hours before it, walking the parts of Colby she hasn't let herself see yet. Not the Ward Street, not the corner where the accident happened, just the ordinary geography of a town, relearning her presence. The hardware store, the pharmacy, a bakery with a handwritten menu in the window that makes her think, briefly and painfully, of the kind of life that includes knowing your local bakery by name. She files that under later. She has a long list of laters. The bar fills slowly the way weeknight bars do, with the specific demographic of people who have somewhere better to be, and have decided not to go there. 2 men at a corner table split a pitcher with the efficiency of a long practice. A woman at the far end of the bar stares at her phone with the focused despair of someone waiting for a text that isn't coming. Kenna moves, pours, wipes down surfaces, makes change, and feels something almost like calm settle into her shoulders, the particular relief of being useful, of having her hands occupied, of existing in a role with clear parameters. Gerald watches her for the first hour and then stops, which she takes as approval. She doesn't make mistakes. She learned in prison that the best way to be left alone is to be competent, and she has carried that lesson out with her like the one useful thing in the bag. She knows the difference between someone who wants to talk and someone who wants their drink refilled in silence, and she serves both without confusion. At 7:30, the door opens and a woman comes in alone. She takes the stool at the far end of the counter, not the very last one, but close, the way people do when they want space without committing to total isolation. She's wearing a jacket with a paint stain on the right sleeve and a patch on the left elbow, and her hair is dark auburn and pulled back in a knot that has been losing ground since probably mid-afternoon. She sits with the posture of someone who is tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix, and she looks at the bar in front of her like she's deciding something. Kenna gives her a minute. Then she walks over. "What can I get you?" The woman looks up. Her eyes are a complicated shade of green. Not one thing, not grass or glass or water. Something that moves between all of them depending on the light. She holds Kenna's gaze for a beat longer than the question requires, like she's doing a quick private calculation, and then she names a whiskey and a specific pour and goes back to looking at the bar. Kenna pours it clean and sets it down without comment. The woman doesn't say thank you, but she wraps both hands around the glass in a way that reads as gratitude in a different language. Kenna moves to the other end of the bar and lets her have the silence, which is clearly what she came for. She doesn't know her name yet. She doesn't know that this woman has been coming to this stool every Tuesday for 2 years, since the funeral, since she drove back from Austin with one suitcase, and a grief so large it needed its own geography. She doesn't know any of the things that will make this moment unbearable in retrospect. Right now she knows only this. A woman came into the bar alone and ordered whiskey and held it like it was the last warm thing in the room, and something in Kenna's chest moved sideways, quietly, without permission. She files that under later too. The list is getting long. Gerald mentions it on a Thursday, the way he mentions most things. Sideways, without looking up, as a footnote to something else entirely. He's counting the register, and Kenna is restocking the well, and he says, between 2 numbers, he's adding in his head, "Patrick's sister comes in Tuesdays. Has since he died. Don't take it personally if she's dark. She's not dark at you. She's just dark." Then he goes back to counting, and Kenna goes back to restocking, and the sentence hangs in the air between them like something that doesn't know yet what it's going to cost. She puts down the bottle in her hand very carefully. Patrick's sister. The name moves through her like cold water. Not a shock exactly, more like a recognition, the body confirming something the mind has been circling without landing on. Patrick Ward. She has not said that name out loud in 4 years. Not since the last parole hearing where she was required to demonstrate, in front of a panel of 3 people with tired eyes, that she understood the full weight of what she had taken from the world. She understood it. She has never stopped understanding it. She finishes restocking. She wipes down the bar. She does the things her hands know how to do while her mind works through the geometry of what she's just learned. That the woman with the paint-stained jacket and the in-between eyes and the whiskey she holds like a lifeline is Patrick's sister. That she comes every Tuesday. That she has been coming every Tuesday since the funeral that Kenna was not allowed to attend, sitting on that stool with her grief, in the bar where Kenna now works, in the town where Kenna has now returned, to try to build something out of the wreckage she made. The reasonable thing, the safe thing, the thing a person does when they are trying to prove they can make good decisions, is to quit. She knows this with the same cold clarity she brings to all the hard math of her life. She should hand Gerald the apron before Tuesday, find something on the other side of town, put as much distance as possible between herself and the specific collision of things that this particular bar now represents. She runs through the logic twice to make sure it holds. It holds. She comes in for her Friday shift and says nothing. Saturday, she tells herself she'll decide by Sunday. Sunday, she tells herself Monday. Monday, she stops pretending she's going to do the reasonable thing and starts trying to understand why. The answer, when she's honest enough to look at it directly, is not complicated and not comfortable. She wants to see her again. Not for any reason she can justify, not as part of any plan, not as a step toward anything she has a right to want. Just, she wants to see her again. It's the first thing she's wanted for herself, purely for herself, in longer than she can count. And she hates that it's this. Tuesday, she ties on the apron at 4 o'clock and does not watch the door. The woman comes in at 7:20. Same stool, same jacket, different stain. Blue this time on the collar, still fresh enough to be slightly shiny under the bar light. Her hair is down tonight, and doing everything at once. And she sits with the same posture of contained exhaustion. And she looks up when Kenna approaches with the same quality of attention. Brief, direct, privately calculating. "Same?" Kenna asks. The woman nods. Then, as Kenna is pouring, "You remembered. It's my job to remember." Something passes through the woman's expression. Not quite amusement, not quite its opposite. She wraps her hands around the glass. Kenna moves away, because moving away is the only thing she trusts herself to do. And she spends the next 2 hours being professional and competent, and completely aware of every small movement at the far end of the bar. She learns the name by accident, the way she's learned most of the things in her life that have mattered. A man comes in around 9, someone who knows the woman, calls across the bar, "Sloan, hey, didn't see you there." And the woman turns and raises her glass in the minimal greeting of someone who is being polite and would prefer not to be. Sloan. Sloan Ward. Kenna is washing a glass when she hears it, and she keeps washing the glass, round and round, long after it's clean, because her hands need something to hold on to, and because the name has just rearranged everything. Every Tuesday, every sideways glance, every small moment of warmth she has allowed herself in this bar, into something that was never hers to have. She finds the street on a Saturday afternoon, when the bar is closed, and the motel room has gotten small in the way rooms do when you've been inside your own head for too long. She doesn't take the direct route. She gives herself permission to change her mind at every corner, which is a trick she learned from a therapist she saw twice in prison before the funding was cut. Give yourself the exit, and you're more likely to keep walking. It works, mostly. She turns left on Birch, right on 2nd, adds 4 blocks going north, and arrives at Grover Lane from the far end, so it feels less like destination and more like accident. The street is quiet in the specific way of Saturday afternoons in small towns, a man washing a car 2 houses down, a sprinkler going somewhere out of sight, the distant sound of a lawnmower that keeps stopping and starting like it can't commit. Kenna walks slowly, hands in her pockets, with the practiced casualness of someone who belongs here, which is the one performance she has never been able to make herself believe. She counts house numbers: 38, 40, 42. 44 is yellow with white shutters, exactly as she knew it would be from the single photograph she found online, a neighborhood association newsletter from 3 years ago, a background detail in a picture about a block party, the ward house visible at the edge of the frame. She had looked at that photograph so many times the image had started to separate from meaning, become just shapes and colors, and then she would blink and it would reassemble into, "That is the house where my daughter sleeps." The tricycle is still in the driveway. Someone has reattached the streamer that was coming undone. It's pink again, neat, tied back with what looks like a rubber band. There is new chalk on the driveway since Wednesday. A rainbow with too many colors. A figure that might be a person or might be a tree. And a word in large, unsteady letters that Kenna has to tilt her head to read. Diane. Her daughter has written her own name on the driveway in yellow chalk, large enough to be seen from the sidewalk, with the total confidence of a child who has not yet learned that the world does not always want to know you're there. Kenna stands very still and reads it 3 times. She gives herself 60 seconds, same as before. It is not enough, and it is what she has. At 30 seconds, a curtain moves in the front window. Just slightly. Just enough. The way curtains move when someone is checking without wanting to be seen checking. She doesn't know who it is. She doesn't let herself imagine. At 60, she turns and walks back the way she came, at the same pace, with the same hands-in-pockets posture, and she doesn't let herself run until she's 2 streets away and certain no one is watching. She is back at the bar that evening for a shift she didn't have to take, but asked Gerald for anyway, because the alternative was the motel room, and her own thoughts, and the image of yellow chalk letters she couldn't stop reading. The bar is half full. She works. Her hands know what to do, and she lets them do it, grateful for the simple tyranny of tasks. Sloane comes in at 8, which is unusual. Tuesdays are her night, not Saturdays, and Kenna registers the deviation before she can stop herself from registering it. She looks different outside the context Kenna has built for her. Same jacket, but her hair is still damp at the ends, like she came from somewhere else first, and there is a tiredness in her face that is different from the usual kind. Heavier. More recent. She sits. Kenna walks over, and that's when she sees it. A bruise along the left side of Sloane's jaw. Not large, not dramatic. The greenish yellow of something 2 or 3 days old that has been mostly ignored. Kenna says nothing. She reaches under the bar for a clean cloth, fills it with ice from the bin, wraps it, and sets it on the counter between them without comment or question, the way she would set down a drink. Sloane looks at it. Then she looks at Kenna with an expression that is not quite surprise but is adjacent to it. The look of someone who was prepared for a reaction and received something else entirely. Fender bender, Sloane says. Sure, Kenna says, and moves to the other end of the bar. She doesn't look back, but 10 minutes later, when she does glance over, the cloth is pressed against Sloane's jaw and her eyes are closed, and she looks, for just that moment, like someone who has put down something heavy. Kenna turns back to her work and feels something settle in her chest. Not warmth exactly, not yet, but the place where warmth might eventually live, if she lets it. She hasn't decided yet whether she will. It becomes a thing without either of them deciding it should be. That's how Kenna notices it first. Not as a choice, but as a pattern. The way you notice a pattern in weather, or in the behavior of someone you've been watching carefully without admitting you're watching. Sloane comes in on Tuesdays. Kenna works Tuesdays. The rest assembles itself from there, the way things do when 2 people stop pretending they're not paying attention to each other. The conversations start small, which is the only way Kenna trusts them. A question about the whiskey. Sloane wants to know where it's from, not because she's precious about it, but because she's the kind of person who wants to know the origin of things. Kenna will learn the specific history of how something got to where it is. Kenna looks it up on her phone between customers and reports back, and Sloane listens with the focused attention she brings to everything, and that's the first Tuesday that feels different from the ones before it. The second conversation is about the bar itself. Sloane mentions offhand that the back wall is load-bearing, and whoever renovated last didn't account for it properly, which will be a problem in about 10 years. Kenna asks how she knows. Sloane says she's an architect. Or was. The OR was lands with a weight she doesn't explain, and Kenna doesn't push, because she understands better than most people the grammar of sentences that end before they're finished. By the 4th Tuesday, Kenna knows this. Sloane drinks the same whiskey every time. Neat, never more than 2. She tips too well and doesn't seem to notice that she does. She comes in already tired and leaves more tired, but there's a quality to the second tiredness that is different. Looser, somehow. Like she set something down temporarily, even if she'll have to pick it back up on the way out. She reads on her phone between conversations, but she's not really reading. Her eyes move too slowly for someone taking in information. She is mostly just occupying herself. Kenna recognizes the habit. What Sloane knows about Kenna by the 4th Tuesday is less, because Kenna offers less. She's from somewhere else. She hasn't been in Colby long. She works cleanly and without complaint, and she doesn't fill silences with noise, which Sloane seems to appreciate in the specific way of someone who has spent too long around people who do. Once, Sloane watches her work for a moment and says, "You move like someone who's been doing this a long time." And Kenna says, "I've been doing a lot of things a long time." And Sloane looks at her with those in-between eyes and nods slowly, like she's filed it somewhere. On the 5th Tuesday, Sloane arrives with a cardboard tube under her arm and spreads architectural drawings across the far end of the counter while she drinks. Kenna catches fragments when she passes: floor plans, elevation marks, handwritten notes in a small, precise script. She doesn't ask. Sloane volunteers eventually that she's been doing freelance work since she came back to Colby. Small residential projects. Nothing like what she was doing in Austin. She says came back in a way that doesn't invite questions about what she came back from. And Kenna respects the boundary, because she lives behind several of her own. "Do you like it?" Kenna asks. "The freelance." Sloane considers this with more seriousness than the question might seem to require. "I like the problem solving," she says finally. "I like when something that didn't work starts to work. The rest of it," she makes a small gesture with her hand that means, "the rest of it is the price I pay for the part I like." Kenna understands this so precisely that she has to look away. She is learning Sloane in the way she's learned most things that matter. Slowly, through accumulation, without letting herself name what she's doing while she's doing it. The shape of her attention, the way she goes quiet when something lands differently than expected. The fact that she always checks her phone at 9:15, every Tuesday, and whatever she sees there either relaxes her slightly or doesn't. And on the Tuesdays that it doesn't, she orders a second whiskey and drinks it more carefully than the first, like she's rationing something. Kenna does not ask about the phone. She does not ask about Austin, or what it costs Sloane to leave it, or what keeps her in Colby now beyond the obvious answer that she already knows and cannot acknowledge. She asks about load-bearing walls and the whiskey's origin, and whether the architectural drawings are for someone in town. And Sloane answers all of these things with the gradual ease of someone who is getting used to being asked. It is, Kenna thinks on the 6th Tuesday, walking home in the cold with her hands in her pockets, and her breath making small clouds in the dark, the closest thing to friendship she has had in 7 years. She holds that thought carefully, at a distance, the way you hold something that might be fragile or might be dangerous, and you haven't yet figured out which. Then she goes back to the motel, and lies on top of the covers and stares at the ceiling and tells herself, clearly and firmly, that friendship is exactly what it is and exactly what it will stay. She almost believes it. It happens on a Wednesday, which feels important somehow. Not a Tuesday. Not on her terms. Not in the controlled environment of the bar where she knows her exits and her distances. A Wednesday afternoon in November, the sky the color of old dishwater, Kenna walking back from the grocery store with a bag that isn't heavy enough to justify how slowly she's moving. She's been thinking about DM. She does this on Wednesdays sometimes. Lets herself think about her daughter with slightly less discipline than usual, as a controlled experiment in feeling things without breaking. It mostly works. She turns onto Main Street, and that's when she sees them. They come out of the pharmacy on the corner, Sloane first, holding the door, and then a small girl who exits with the particular energy of a child who has been patient for as long as she intends to be patient and is now done. Red hair, brighter than Sloane's, catching the gray afternoon light in a way that seems almost unreasonable. Boots that are slightly too big, the kind a child grows into rather than fits. A stuffed rabbit held by one ear, dragged behind her with the absolute confidence of someone who has never once considered whether the rabbit minds. Kenna stops walking. The girl says something. Kenna is too far away to hear the words, catches only the rhythm of it, the rising inflection of a question or a complaint, or one of the 1,000 things children say that exist somewhere between both. Sloane looks down at her and responds, and whatever she says makes the girl throw her head back and laugh. It's a full-body laugh. the kind that children do before they learn to modulate themselves for other people's comfort. Shoulders up, eyes closed, completely undefended. Kenna knows that laugh. She doesn't know how she knows it. She has heard her daughter laugh exactly once before, from a distance of 2 houses, through the window of a car she was driving away from because 60 seconds was what she'd given herself, and she was trying to be disciplined. It was less than a second of sound, barely a fragment, the kind of thing you could convince yourself you imagined. But the body keeps what the mind tries to manage, and her body knows that laugh the way it knows her own heartbeat, not by thinking about it, just by the fact of it, the simple animal recognition of a sound that belongs to you. She steps back against the wall of the dry cleaners without deciding to. Her shoulder blades meet brick, and she presses into it and holds her grocery bag against her chest with both arms, because she needs something to hold, and it's what she has. Sloane is steering Diem toward a car parked at the curb, one hand at the back of the girl's neck, in the warm, automatic way of someone who has done it 10,000 times. And Diem is still talking, the rabbit still dragging, the boots still slightly too big. She is, Kenna thinks, with a clarity that is almost physical, the most real thing she has ever seen. Everything she imagined over 7 years. The drawings she made in her head of what her daughter might look like, the ages she tracked on a mental calendar, the details she constructed from nothing because nothing was what she had. All of it was wrong, which is to say all of it was just her own hoping dressed up as information. The real Diem is specific and particular and entirely herself. This child, these boots, this laugh, this rabbit, not an idea, a person. Sloane opens the car door and Diem climbs in with the graceless efficiency of a 6-year-old. And then Sloane closes the door and stands for a moment with her hand still on the handle, looking down at the pavement. And there is something in her posture in that unobserved moment, a heaviness, a holding, that Kenna recognizes without being able to name. Then Sloane walks around to the driver's side and gets in, and the car pulls out, and Main Street goes back to being just a street. Kenna stands against the brick wall for a long time after the car disappears. Long enough that a woman coming out of the dry cleaners asks if she's all right, and Kenna says yes, fine, thank you, in the automatic voice she keeps ready for exactly these moments. She walks the rest of the way to the motel slowly, lets herself in, sits on the edge of the bed. She doesn't cry immediately. She makes herself put the groceries away first, because the discipline matters, because it is the only thing she has that is entirely her own. She puts the milk in the small fridge and the bread on the counter, and the apples in a line along the windowsill. And then she sits back down on the edge of the bed, and she cries for the first time since year 3, when she learned that crying doesn't ask anything of the universe, and sometimes just asks something of yourself. This is one of those times. She lets it. It's Sloane who suggests coffee, which surprises Kenna enough that she almost says no out of reflex. It's a Tuesday, late, the bar winding down to its last 2 customers, and Sloane is putting on her jacket with the unhurried movement of someone who doesn't have anywhere urgent to be, and she says it casually. There's a place on 4th that stays open until midnight, if you get off soon, in the tone of someone who has been considering saying it for longer than the casualness implies. Kenna looks at her for a moment. Then she unties her apron and tells Gerald she's leaving. The place on 4th is small and overlit in the way of late-night coffee shops, the kind of brightness that feels honest rather than harsh, like it's not trying to flatter anyone. They take a table in the corner and order without looking at the menu, and for the first 3 minutes they talk about nothing, the coffee, the cold, whether the street outside has always been one way, or if that's recent. Kenna lets Sloane lead, because Sloane suggested this, and therefore Sloane has something she came here to do, and Kenna has learned to wait. You said once that you've been doing a lot of things for a long time, Sloane says eventually, wrapping both hands around her mug in the way she wraps them around the whiskey glass. Like warmth is something to be held carefully. I've been thinking about that. It wasn't a confession, Kenna says. I know, I'm not asking for one. She looks up. I'm asking for, I don't know, Something true. You don't have to make it big. Kenna looks at her for a long moment. Outside, a car passes slowly, its headlights sweeping briefly across the window. She thinks about all the versions of the truth she carries. The legal version, the version she told the parole board, the version she tells herself at 3 a.m. when the discipline slips. She thinks about which one is small enough to fit inside a late-night coffee shop without breaking something. I was in prison, she says. I got out 8 months ago. I came here because I needed to be here, and I can't explain that part yet. She holds Sloane's gaze because looking away would make it a confession, and she meant what she said. It isn't one. That's the true thing. That's what I have right now. Sloane is quiet for long enough that Kenna starts to catalog her exits. Not physically. She's not afraid of Sloane, but emotionally. The way she's learned to map the distance back to herself when a conversation starts to cost too much. Then Sloane says, "Okay." Just that. Not "I'm sorry," or "that must have been hard," or any of the responses that are really about the person giving them, rather than the person receiving. Just okay. An acknowledgement without verdict, which is so rare in Kenna's experience of telling people difficult things, that she has to take a slow breath before she can continue existing normally in the conversation. "You're not going to ask what for," Kenna says. "Do you want me to?" "No." "Then I'm not going to." Sloane turns her mug in a slow circle on the table. Everyone in Colby has a story they tell and a story they don't. The one they don't is usually the one that matters. She says it without self-pity, which means it's also about her, which means there is a version of Sloane's truth that also lives in a category of things not yet speakable. Kenna files this carefully. They stay for another hour. The conversation moves. Architecture, the specific difficulty of freelance work in a small town. A book Sloane is reading that she describes with the slightly embarrassed enthusiasm of someone who didn't expect to love it. Kenna talks less and listens more, which is her natural proportion, and Sloane seems comfortable with that balance in the way of someone who has spent too long around people who talk over silences rather than into them. At one point, Sloane laughs at something Kenna says, a real laugh, unguarded, nothing like the performance of amusement, and Kenna feels it land somewhere specific and uninvited. Walking back to the motel alone, she takes stock with the honesty she reserves for the dark and the cold, and the absence of anyone who might see her face while she does it. Something has shifted. Not broken, not crossed, just moved. The way tectonic things move, slowly and without drama, and with enormous eventual consequence. She knew it was going to happen. She has known since the first Tuesday, probably, in the way you know things you're not ready to act on. She just didn't expect it to feel, underneath all the guilt and the impossibility, and the long list of reasons it cannot be what it is, quite so much like something she deserves. It happens on a Tuesday in December, the kind of cold that makes the bar feel smaller and warmer than it is. Everyone pulled slightly closer to everything by the temperature outside. Kenna is halfway through her shift when it happens, which means she is halfway through the part of the week she has been moving towards since the previous Wednesday, which is something she has stopped pretending isn't true. She is wiping down the bar. Sloane is at her usual stool, a whiskey and a set of drawings, and the focused quiet she brings when she's working through something. It is, by every measure Kenna has, a normal Tuesday. The man who comes in at 8:30 is someone she hasn't seen before. Middle-aged, the kind of familiar that means he grew up here and never left. The particular confidence of someone who knows every face in a room and is used to being known back. He takes a stool 3 down from Sloane, orders a beer, and looks around the bar with the slow survey of someone taking attendance. His eyes land on Kenna. "You're new," he says. "It's not unfriendly. Small towns say you're new the way other places say hello." "Few months," Kenna says, setting down his beer. "What's your name?" She has thought about this moment. She has thought about it the way she thinks about all the foreseeable complications of being back in Colby, methodically, in advance, with contingency plans she hopes not to use. She knows that her name is not famous, that the case was local news rather than national, that 7 years is long enough for most people's memories to soften around the edges. She also knows that some memories don't soften. Some people hold on to certain names the way they hold on to old injuries, not out of malice, just out of the particular loyalty of people who loved someone. "Kenna," she says. "Kenna Rowan." The man's expression doesn't change immediately. It does the thing that expressions do when the brain is catching up to the ears. A half-second of neutral, and then something moves behind his eyes, slow and certain, like a door opening in a dark room. He looks at her differently. Not with hatred, not with the hot, immediate anger she has braced for in versions of this moment she's rehearsed. With something colder. Recognition, and the decision about what to do with it. "Huh," he says. He picks up his beer and moves to the other end of the bar. Kenna goes back to wiping down surfaces. Her hands are steady. She has practiced steady hands for 7 years, and they do not fail her now, which is the one thing she can say for the rehearsals. She does not look at Sloane. She is aware of Sloane the way she is always aware of Sloane. Peripherally, constantly, with a specific attention of someone trying not to pay attention. And she does not turn her head. She doesn't need to. She hears the pencil stop moving on the drawings. The bar continues around them. Someone feeds money into the jukebox. Gerald comes out of the back, checks the register, goes back in. The man at the end of the bar finishes his beer and leaves without looking at Kenna again. Everything is normal, and nothing is normal, and Kenna keeps moving, keeps working, keeps being the person whose hands know what to do, even when the rest of her is very still inside. At 9 o'clock she looks up, and Sloane's stool is empty. The drawings are gone. The whiskey glass is half full, which means she left quickly, which means she didn't finish, which means Kenna stops that line of thought and finishes the shift and walks home in the cold and sits on the edge of the bed and does not sleep. Wednesday passes. Thursday. Friday, she works a shift and checks the door every time it opens, which she despises herself for and cannot stop. Saturday, she tells herself that Sloane doesn't owe her anything. Not an explanation, not a confrontation, not even the acknowledgement that something happened. She knew this was coming. She knew from the moment Gerald said Patrick's sister that there was an expiration date on whatever this was, and she moved toward it anyway. And that is her own fault entirely. On Thursday of the following week, at 8:10, the door opens. Sloane sits down on her stool. She doesn't order. She doesn't look at the bar in front of her the way she usually does. She looks directly at Kenna, across the distance between them, with an expression that has clearly been prepared and has cost something to prepare. She says it quietly, just loud enough to carry. "Tell me your version." Kenna looks at her for a long moment. The bar is not empty, but it is quiet enough. A couple in the corner, Gerald in the back, the jukebox between songs. She picks up a glass, sets it down, picks up a cloth, sets that down too. Then she says to Gerald, without turning around, that she's taking her break, and Gerald says fine, and she comes around the bar and tilts her head toward the door, and Sloane follows her out into the cold without a word. They sit on the low wall outside, the one that borders the parking lot, which is not a comfortable place to sit, but is private in the way outdoor places are private in winter. No one lingers. No one passes slowly. Everyone moves with the purposeful speed of people who want to be somewhere warmer. Kenna pulls her jacket tighter and looks at the parking lot, and decides to do something she has not done for any audience since the night of the sentencing, when her public defender told her to show remorse. And she showed it, and it wasn't enough, and it was also entirely real. She decides to tell the truth in the order it actually happened. "Patrick and I had been together for 2 years, she says. I was 22. It was good mostly. It was a normal relationship. We fought about normal things, and made up about normal things, and I was not paying enough attention to how much he was drinking because I was 22, and I didn't know yet that not paying attention is its own kind of choice. She says this without self-pity, which takes effort, because the 22-year-old she's describing deserves some pity, and the 32-year-old she is now has none left to give her. The night of the accident, we'd been at a party. He was drunk, more than I realized, or more than I let myself realize, which is a distinction I've had 7 years to think about. He wanted to drive. I took the keys. That part, I did right. She pauses. A car moves through the parking lot slowly, its headlights sweeping past them. I hadn't been drinking. I was legal. I was sober. I was the responsible one. That's what made it so. That's why the sentence was what it was, I think. Because there was no excuse. I just drove badly in the rain on a road I didn't know well enough, and I went through a red light, and the car that hit us hit his side. She stops. Sloane is very still beside her. Not the stillness of shock. Something more deliberate. The stillness of a person who has decided to receive something fully, rather than flinch from it. He didn't die immediately, Kenna says. That's the part I don't say in official versions because it doesn't change the legal facts, and it only makes people uncomfortable. He died in the hospital 4 days later. I was there for the first day, before the arrest. I held his hand. I don't know if he knew I was there. She looks at her own hands now, in her lap, the hands that held his, and have held guilt, and have tied and untied the same apron every day for months, like penance is a practical thing. I never told the court that I loved him. My lawyer said it would read as manipulation. Maybe it would have, but I did. That's also true. Sloane exhales slowly. The breath makes a small cloud in the cold air and disappears. There's one more thing, Kenna says. The part I haven't told anyone in Colby. The part I didn't say in court because Patrick asked me not to. The week before the trial. The last time I spoke to anyone in your family. She turns to look at Sloane directly, because this part requires being looked at. He knew about the red light. He was awake enough in the car to know what happened. Before the ambulance came, he told me not to say he'd been drinking. He was scared. For his parents. For what they'd think. He asked me to let the record show that I was solely at fault. She holds Sloane's gaze. So I did. The parking lot is very quiet. Somewhere down the street, a door opens and closes. I'm not telling you this to change what I am in the story, Kenna says carefully. I drove. I went through the light. Those are facts that belong to me regardless of what else is true. I'm telling you because you asked for my version, and that is my version, and I think you deserve to have it. She looks back at the parking lot. That's all of it. That's everything. Sloane doesn't speak for a long time, long enough that Kenna starts to gather herself for the walk back inside, the return to the bar and the apron and the controlled distances she knows how to maintain. Then she feels it. Sloane's hand, finding hers in the dark between them on the cold wall, not squeezing, not performing comfort, just settling there. Present. Decided. Kenna looks down at their hands and does not move and does not speak, and breathes the cold air in and out and thinks, this is the most dangerous moment of my life, and I am not going to ruin it. Sloane tells her parents on a Sunday. She doesn't tell Kenna she's going to do it. Kenna finds out afterward, from the specific quality of silence that comes through on the other end of the phone, when Sloane calls at 9 p.m. and doesn't speak immediately, the silence of someone who has just come from somewhere that cost them. Kenna sits on the edge of the motel bed and holds the phone and waits, because waiting is what she has to offer, and she has learned to offer it without making it about herself. I told them you were back, Sloane says finally. Kenna closes her eyes. How did that go? About how you'd expect. A pause. My mother wants you to leave. She used the word demand, which she usually saves for things she actually believes will work. Another pause, shorter. My father didn't say anything. He left the room. With him, that's more complicated than the demand. She doesn't ask Sloane what she said in her defense, because Sloane, having defended her to her own family, is already more than Kenna has a right to receive, and she won't make it transactional by cataloging it. She asks instead if Sloane is all right, which is the question underneath all the other questions, and Sloane says I will be in the tone of someone answering accurately, rather than reassuringly. Kenna appreciates the accuracy. She has had enough reassurance in her life that turned out to be just noise. The following Wednesday, Sloane asks if Kenna will come with her. Not to the house. She isn't asking for that. Not yet, she says, and the not yet lands with a weight Kenna doesn't examine directly. To the coffee shop on 4th, where Sloane will meet her mother. Neutral ground, public space, the kind of meeting that has rules built into its location. Kenna says yes before she finishes deciding, which is becoming a pattern with Sloane that she has given up trying to correct. Diana Ward is a small woman who carries herself like someone larger, the posture of a person who decided early that the world required a certain firmness and has never revised the decision. She is already there when they arrive, sitting with a coffee she isn't drinking, and she looks at Kenna the way Kenna has been looked at before, with the specific exhausted anger of someone who has run out of softer feelings and is left with only this one. Kenna meets her eyes and doesn't look away, because looking away would be a kind of argument, and she isn't here to argue. You have no idea, Diana says, without preamble, without hello, what it was like. After. No, Kenna says. I don't. I'm sorry. Sorry. Diana says the word like she's turning it over, looking for the useful part, not finding it. He was 30 years old. He had a daughter he'd held for 6 weeks. He had... She stops. Her jaw tightens with the particular effort of a woman who has cried this specific grief dry and refuses to do it in a coffee shop in front of the person who caused it. You don't get to come back here and build a life out of the pieces of his. I'm not trying to take anything that was his, Kenna says carefully. I'm trying to be present for something that's also mine. DM is... She stops, recalibrates, because this is not a conversation where she can afford imprecision. I know I have no rights that haven't been earned. I'm not here to claim anything. I'm here because she exists, and I exist, and I believe, I have to believe, that those two facts can eventually be in the same room without one of them destroying the other. Diana looks at her for a long time. Then she looks at Sloane, which is a different kind of looking. Older, more layered. The look of a mother trying to understand a child she thought she knew the shape of. Sloane holds it without flinching, which Kenna suspects costs her more than it appears to. The meeting lasts 20 minutes. Diana leaves first, without resolution, without softening, but also without the door-closing finality Kenna had prepared for. She leaves the way weather systems leave. The pressure changes, the temperature shifts, and you understand that it isn't over, just moved somewhere else for now. Kenna watches her go and breathes. Outside, walking back toward the bar in the cold, Sloane reaches for her hand in the easy way of someone for whom it has already become a natural thing, and Kenna lets her. And they walk half a block in silence before Sloane stops, turns to face her, and kisses her. Softly, just once, her hand resting against Kenna's jaw like she's holding something she's been careful with for a long time. It isn't dramatic. It isn't punctuation to the difficulty of the afternoon. It's quiet and certain, the way Sloane does most things, like she has decided, and the decision is enough. Kenna feels 7 years of careful come undone, gently, all at once. The Wards find out about them on a Thursday, which is nobody's fault and everybody's timing. Sloane has been careful. They both have. In the way of people who understand that what they're doing exists inside a larger story with other people's pain in it, and carefulness is the minimum they owe. But Colby is a small town. and small towns have their own intelligence. The distributed awareness of people who have known each other long enough to notice deviations from pattern. And someone sees them outside the coffee shop on 4th, and someone else mentions it to someone else. And by Thursday evening, Robert Ward is calling his daughter, and Diana Ward is calling her lawyer. Kenna finds out when Sloane arrives at the bar at 8, not on a Tuesday, with the expression she has learned to read as something has happened, and I am holding it together by a specific act of will. She comes around the bar without waiting for Sloane to speak, and tells Gerald she needs 10 minutes, and takes Sloane through the back door into the alley, where the cold is immediate and clarifying, and there is no one to perform anything for. "They know," Sloane says. "I figured. My mother called a lawyer. She wants to formalize the custody arrangement in a way that would..." She stops, presses her lips together. "In a way that would make any future contact between you and DM contingent on their approval, which they would not give." She says it cleanly, without editorializing, because she knows Kenna needs the information before she needs the comfort, and she has been paying attention. It's not a done thing yet. It's a threat, but it's a real one. Kenna leans against the brick wall of the alley and looks at the sky above the roofline, which is dark and very clear, the kind of cold clear that means no snow. She thinks about DM's name in yellow chalk on the driveway. She thinks about boots that are slightly too big, and a rabbit dragged by one ear, and a laugh she has heard twice and will know forever. She thinks about what it would mean to have that door closed permanently, legally, in a way that would take years and money and emotional resources she doesn't have to contest. "I should go," she says. Sloane goes very still. "What does that mean?" "It means..." Kenna looks at her hands, then at Sloane, because Sloane deserves to be looked at when this is said. "It means that I came here for DM. That was the reason. Everything else that has happened." She gestures between them, which feels inadequate for what she means, but she doesn't have better words, and she won't use bigger ones than she can stand behind. "I didn't plan this. You know I didn't plan this. But I also can't be the reason you lose your family. I can't be the reason DM loses the only..." She stops, starts again. "I can't cost everyone the same things twice." "That's not your decision," Sloane says. "It's partly my decision." "It's not." Sloane's voice is quiet and entirely firm, the voice she uses when she has thought something through completely and arrived somewhere she intends to stay. "You don't get to decide what I lose and what I don't. You don't get to make that calculation for me and call it consideration. I've had people make calculations about what I can handle for 3 years, and I am done with it." She takes a step closer, not aggressive, just closing the distance that Kenna is trying to use as an argument. "I know what this costs. I know it better than you do, because I know my parents and you don't. Not really, not yet. And I'm still here, in this alley, on a Thursday." Kenna looks at her for a long time. The cold settles around them, patient and indifferent. "I'm scared," she says finally, which is the truest thing she has said in this conversation, and possibly the truest thing she has said to another person in years. Not of Diana Ward's lawyer, not of the legal threat, though those fears are real enough. Scared of wanting this much. Scared of the specific arithmetic of her own history, that the things she wants have a pattern of becoming the things she destroys. "I know," Sloane says. "I'm scared too." She reaches up and touches Kenna's face, briefly with the back of 2 fingers, the gesture of someone making contact rather than making a point. That's not the same as it being wrong. The following morning, Kenna calls Diana Ward. She gets the number from Sloane, who gives it without asking why, and she sits in the motel room with the phone in her hand for 20 minutes before she dials. It rings 4 times. Then Diana answers, and Kenna says, "I'd like to meet with you. Without Sloane. Just us." A silence that has weather in it. Then Diana says, "Tomorrow, 10 o'clock, the house," and hangs up. Kenna sets the phone down on the bedspread and sits with the specific feeling of someone who has just walked toward the thing they are most afraid of and has not yet found out what it does to them. Outside the window, Colby goes about its morning. Somewhere across town, on a street she knows by number, a 6-year-old is probably eating breakfast and probably has opinions about it. Kenna holds that thought carefully, like something she hasn't yet earned the right to hold without care, and she breathes, and she gets ready. Diana Ward answers the door before Kenna knocks, which means she was watching from the window, which means she has been standing near the window for some time. She is dressed with the particular formality of someone who needed armor and chose clothing, and she holds the door open without greeting, which Kenna takes as the invitation it is, and steps inside. The house smells like coffee and something baked, the smell of a home that has been a home for a long time, and Kenna stands in the hallway and does not look around too much, because looking around too much would be a kind of hunger she doesn't have the right to show. Diana leads her to the kitchen. There are 2 cups already on the table, which means she prepared for this in the practical way of someone who handles difficulty by giving it a structure. They sit across from each other, and Kenna wraps her hands around the mug and waits, because this is Diana's house and Diana's terms, and Kenna has exactly one thing to offer this woman, which is the truth delivered without agenda, and she will not waste it by going first. "I want to understand something," Diana says. "Not for the lawyer, not for any official reason. I want to understand why you came back." She looks at Kenna directly, the way she did in the coffee shop, except this time there is something different underneath the hardness. Not softness exactly, but an opening. The quality of a question that is genuinely a question rather than an accusation wearing a question's punctuation. "You could have stayed away. You could have built a life somewhere else and let Diem have the one she has. Why here? Why now?" Kenna thinks about the 11-hour bus ride and the motel room and the address memorized down to the house number. She thinks about 60 seconds on a sidewalk and a tricycle with a reattached streamer and a name written in yellow chalk. She thinks about what she rehearsed on the walk over and how none of it is what she actually wants to say. "Because she wrote her name on your driveway," she says, "in chalk, large enough to see from the street. And I stood there and read it and I thought, she knows she exists. She's certain of it. She has no idea yet that there are people in the world who will try to make her uncertain of it. And I want to be someone who never does that to her." She holds Diana's gaze. "I'm not here to take her from you. I know what you've given her. I know what it cost you to give it. After everything. I'm here because I want to know her. And I want her to know that she came from someone who chose, eventually, to be worth knowing. Even if that takes years. Even if she decides, when she's old enough to decide, that she doesn't want to know me back." Diana is quiet for a long time. She turns her mug in a slow circle, a gesture Kenna recognizes with a pang as something Sloane also does, the family habit of buying time through motion. Outside the kitchen window, the backyard is visible. A swing set, a plastic playhouse, a patch of garden that someone tends with care. Kenna looks at it and looks away, because the looking is a kind of longing she is trying to keep proportionate. "She asks about you," Diana says finally. The words cost her something visible. Not often. Not in a way that she doesn't have the full story. She knows she has a mother who couldn't be with her. Children her age ask concrete questions. She asked once if you were dead. She pauses. Robert told her no, that you were somewhere else, getting better. He didn't tell me he'd said it until later. Another pause, longer. I was angry at him for it. I'm less angry now. Kenna says nothing. There is nothing to say that would be adequate, and she has learned the discipline of not filling silences with inadequate things. They talk for an hour. Not easily. Not without the weight of everything underneath each sentence. But honestly, in the way of two people who have agreed, without saying so, that honesty is the only currency worth spending here. Diana talks about Patrick in a way she clearly hasn't allowed herself to in a long time. Not the loss of him, but the fact of him. Who he was. The specific person, rather than the grief. Kenna listens with everything she has. When she leaves, Diana stands in the doorway and says, 2 weeks, a Saturday afternoon, the backyard. Nothing else. But it is enough. The Saturday is cold and bright. The sky, the particular blue of December mornings that are trying their best. Sloane is there, leaning against the back porch railing with her hands in her pockets, and she meets Kenna's eyes as she comes through the gate with an expression that says everything and asks nothing. Robert Ward shakes Kenna's hand without warmth but without hostility, which is its own kind of progress. Diana is inside, visible through the kitchen window, not watching and watching. DM is on the swing. She is wearing a yellow coat and the boots that are still slightly too big, and she is swinging with the total physical commitment of a child who has not yet learned to do things by halves, legs pumping, hair flying, making a sound that is somewhere between a song and a commentary on the experience of swinging. She doesn't notice Kenna immediately. Kenna stands at the edge of the yard and lets herself look, without counting seconds, without discipline. Just looks at her daughter in a yellow coat on a swing on a Saturday morning and feels the specific feeling of something that has been broken for a very long time beginning, slowly, imperfectly, to be repaired. Then DM's feet drag to a stop and she looks up, and her eyes, Patrick's eyes, brown and direct, find Kenna's across the yard with the uncomplicated curiosity of a child who has not yet learned to be afraid of strangers. She studies her for a moment. "Do you know how to do a butterfly knot?" she asks. Kenna blinks. "I don't," she says. "I don't know how." DM considers this with the seriousness it apparently deserves. Then she climbs off the swing and walks across the yard with the slightly too big boots and holds up a shoelace that has come undone, and says, with the patient authority of someone who has important knowledge to share, "I'll show you." Kenna crouches down to her level. Behind her, she can feel Sloane watching from the porch, and the winter sun on the back of her neck, and the specific weight of a moment that has cost 7 years, and every good decision she has ever made, and some bad ones too. She looks at the shoelace. She looks at her daughter's hands, small and certain, already beginning to demonstrate. "Okay," she says. "Show me." 8 months after Kenna Rowan walked back into Colby with one bag and an address memorized down to the house number, she signs a lease on a 1-bedroom apartment 4 blocks from Grover Lane. It's small and the heating is unreliable, and the kitchen window faces a brick wall, but it has her name on a document that says she belongs somewhere, which is the thing she didn't know she needed until she was standing at the rental office with a pen in her hand and her eyes doing something embarrassing. The landlord pretends not to notice. She likes him for it. Sloane helps her move in on a Saturday. This takes approximately 90 minutes because Kenna still owns almost nothing, a fact that Sloane has been quietly, systematically trying to change since February. A blanket here, a secondhand lamp there, a set of kitchen knives she left on Kenna's counter at the motel one Tuesday with no explanation. By the time they carry the last box up the stairs, the apartment already looks like somewhere a person lives, which Kenna suspects was the plan all along. She doesn't say this. She makes coffee instead, and they drink it on the floor, because there is no furniture yet, and Sloane reads the measurements off a notepad and talks about a couch she saw at an estate sale. And Kenna listens and thinks, this is what it feels like to be building something. The custody arrangement was formalized in March. Not by a lawyer, but by an agreement. 4 pages, no court, drafted by Robert Ward at the kitchen table over 2 weeks of careful, painful conversation that Kenna was not present for, but was told about in pieces by Sloane, who was. Kenna gets DM every other Saturday, supervised for the first 3 months and then not, and 1 weekday afternoon per week that rotates depending on school schedule. It is not what she dreamed of in prison, when she let herself dream. which was something total and uncomplicated and always slightly unreal. It is better than that, because it is actual. Specific days, specific hours. A 6-year-old who now knows her phone number and has used it twice to ask questions that could not wait until Saturday. The first call was about whether fish sleep. The second was to report that she had lost a tooth and it had bled a lot, and she wanted Kenna to know. Kenna sat in the motel room and talked her through it, and afterward held the phone for a long time after the call ended, not doing anything, just sitting with the fact of it. Diana Ward does not warm to Kenna, exactly. Warmth may not be available, and Kenna has stopped waiting for it because waiting for it was making her perform a gratitude that had started to feel dishonest. What Diana does is show up. To the handoff on Saturdays. To DM's school play in April, where she sat 2 rows behind Kenna and Sloane, and did not acknowledge them, and did not leave. To a dinner in May that Robert organized with the careful diplomatic energy of a man trying to build a bridge out of the materials available to him. The dinner was not comfortable. No one pretended it was. But Diana passed Kenna the bread without being asked, which Sloane later said was the most her mother had offered anyone she disapproved of in 30 years of marriage, and Kenna accepted it with both hands. Robert shook her hand at the end of that dinner and held it a beat too long, and said quietly, so that only she could hear, "He would have come around." I know he would have. Kenna said thank you and meant it, and did not say anything else because there was nothing else to say, and they both knew it. Sloane got a commission in April, a residential renovation, the biggest project she's had since Austin. A family on the north side of Colby who want to extend their house into the yard and need someone who understands load-bearing walls. She works at the drafting table she set up in her living room, and sometimes at Kenna's kitchen counter, which has no table yet, but has the brick wall window that turns out to have good morning light if you angle yourself correctly. She is, Kenna thinks, the most focused person she has ever known, and also the most patient, and also the only person who has ever made Kenna feel like being known is not the same as being exposed. They have not said the large words yet. This is a choice rather than an omission. They have discussed it once, briefly, in the way of 2 people who understand that some things are too important to say before they're ready to be permanent. There is no urgency. The words are there, available, waiting in the space between them with the patience of things that know they will eventually be spoken. Kenna is in no hurry. She has spent 7 years learning that the future is not a place you rush toward. You build it, carefully, out of the materials you have, one Saturday at a time. This Saturday, DM is at the new apartment for the first time. She has inspected every room with the thoroughness of a building inspector and declared the kitchen acceptable and the bathroom fine and the bedroom in need of more color, a criticism Kenna has taken seriously and written down. She is now sitting on the floor of the living room, which has the couch from the estate sale and nothing else yet, teaching her rabbit the correct way to fold a napkin, which apparently requires significant verbal instruction. Sloane is in the kitchen making lunch. Kenna is on the couch watching DM and thinking about the sidewalk, 2 streets from this apartment where she once stood and counted to 60, and believed that was all she had coming. She thinks about it the way she thinks about most of the hard geography of the last 8 months, not with relief exactly, not with the retrospective certainty that it was always going to work out, because it wasn't always going to, and she knows that, with something more honest than relief. With the particular gratitude of someone who made some right choices and some wrong ones and kept going anyway, and ended up somewhere that has a lease with her name on it, and a child on the floor, and a woman in the kitchen and the smell of something warm. DM looks up from the rabbit. "Can we get a plant?" she asks. "For the window." "Yes," Kenna says. "We can get a plant." DM nods, satisfied, and goes back to the napkin lesson. Sloane calls from the kitchen that lunch is ready. The winter light comes through the brick wall window and hits the floor at the angle that makes it look, for a moment, like something warmer than it is. And Kenna thinks, This is what I came back for. Not to fix what broke. Just to be here for what grows after. She gets up. She goes to the kitchen. She stays.